The blood-red dust of Montana territory clung to Tessa Finley's skirts as she stood trembling on her porch, the doctor's words still ringing in her ears like a death sentence. At 26, most women in Watsonville had already birthed a brood of children, but 5 years of marriage had left her womb as empty as the drought-stricken fields surrounding their modest homestead. Her husband, once so full of promises and tender affection, had declared their union finished just moments before riding away, leaving nothing but harsh words and a cloud of dust in his wake. "Barren women ain't worth keeping," he'd spat, tossing his wedding band into the dirt. "I need sons to work this land, not some dried-up failure of a wife." Tessa's fingers clutched at the worn porch railing, her knuckles white with tension as she watched him disappear into the horizon. The year was 1876, and a woman alone faced few kind prospects in the harsh Montana wilderness. Without a husband, without children, she was little more than a burden in the eyes of Watsonville's judgmental townsfolk. As the first tears began to fall, Tessa had no way of knowing that 50 miles away, a tall stranger with sun-weathered skin and gentle eyes was riding toward Watsonville, carrying with him a burden of his own and the key to changing both their lives forever. Cole Marshall pulled his hat lower against the punishing midday sun, his horse's steady rhythm beneath him the only comfort in days of lonely travel. At 32, he'd seen enough of life to know its cruelties and its rare, precious mercies. The letter from his sister Sarah, crumpled in his saddlebag, had been unexpected word that she'd died of fever, leaving behind 3 young children with no one to care for them but a distant brother they barely knew. "Watsonville," he murmured, studying the crude map a traveler had sketched for him days earlier. "Can't be more than another day's ride." What awaited him there filled him with equal parts dread and determination. 3 orphaned children ages 7, 5, and barely 2 needed more than a drifting cowboy could offer. But blood was blood, and Cole Marshall had never been a man to shirk his responsibilities. As dusk settled over the rolling hills, Cole made camp beside a shallow creek, his thoughts drifting to the impossible task ahead. He was no father, knew nothing of raising children, especially not without a mother's touch. The flickering campfire illuminated his weathered face as he stared into the flames, wondering what kind of life he could possibly provide for his sister's little ones. "I need a miracle," he whispered to the star-filled Montana sky. Little did he know, Watsonville already held the answer to his prayers. The following morning, Tessa faced the harsh reality of her new circumstances. With Thomas gone, the small homestead and meager savings would barely last through winter. Necessity drove her toward town, her wagon loaded with eggs and the last of summer's vegetables to sell at the general store. Watsonville was a modest settlement, a collection of wooden structures clinging to existence along the stagecoach route. The stolid faces of the townsfolk turned to watch as Tessa's wagon rumbled down the main street, their expressions a mixture of pity and judgment. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew Thomas Finley had abandoned his barren wife. Mourning Mrs. Finley, Walter Green, the shopkeeper, greeted her with forced politeness as she entered his store. "Heard about your troubles. Mighty shame." Tessa lifted her chin, refusing to let her dignity crumble beneath the weight of their stares. "I've brought eggs and some late vegetables to sell, Mr. Green." Walter's hesitation spoke volumes. "Well now, I've already got my regular suppliers, you understand. Can't promise I'll need much." "Please," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the desperation clawing at her throat. "I'm asking for fair trade, not charity." After several uncomfortable moments, Walter reluctantly agreed to take half her goods at a fraction of their worth. It was highway robbery, but Tessa had little choice in the matter. As she carefully tucked away the meager payment, the store's bell jangled, announcing a new arrival. Conversations hushed as a tall stranger ducked through the doorway, trail dust clinging to his dark coat. His eyes, clear and searching, swept the store before landing on Walter. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Name's Cole Marshall, looking for information about my late sister's family, Sarah Marshall Williams." A heavy silence fell over the store. Tessa recognized the name. Sarah Williams had been a kind woman whose passing had left the town shaken just 2 weeks prior. Her husband had died in a mining accident the previous year, leaving her alone with 3 young children. Walter cleared his throat. "Sorry for your loss, Mr. Marshall." "Tragic business. The children are being cared for by Widow Peters temporarily, but she's elderly herself and can't manage them much longer." Cole nodded grimly. "I aim to collect them today. They're my responsibility now. You taking them back to your homestead?" Walter asked. A shadow crossed Cole's face. "Don't have one. Been working cattle drives from Texas to Montana for years. Thought I might find suitable arrangements here." The implications hung heavy in the air. A single man with no home, no wife, and 3 young children to raise it was an impossible situation. Tessa found herself speaking before she could reconsider. "The children need stability, Mr. Marshall. A proper home." Cole's intense gaze shifted to her, seeing her fully for the first time. Something in his eyes, a mixture of pride and quiet desperation, stirred something deep within Tessa. "I'm well aware of that, madam," he replied evenly. "Just haven't figured the particulars yet." As Tessa left the store, her mind raced with possibilities. Her empty house suddenly seemed to echo with opportunity rather than loneliness. She had a home but no children to fill it. Cole Marshall had children but no home to shelter them. The symmetry of their circumstances struck her with unexpected force. By the time Tessa returned home, a wild, impossible plan had taken root in her mind. Impulsive decisions had never been her nature, but desperation had a way of rewriting a person's character. She spent the afternoon cleaning her modest 2-bedroom house until it gleamed, as if preparing for important guests. Cole's first meeting with his nieces and nephew left him shaken to his core. 7-year-old Emma, with her solemn eyes and protective stance, 5-year-old James, clutching a wooden horse his father had carved, and little Abigail, barely 2, with tear-stained cheeks and Sarah's golden curls. They regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and fear, these children who shared his blood but were strangers nonetheless. "Uncle Cole's going to take care of you now," Widow Peters explained gently, her arthritic hands patting Emma's shoulder. "Where will we go?" Emma asked, her young voice carrying the weight of responsibilities no child should bear. Cole knelt to meet her eyes. "I'm working on that, little one. I promise I'll keep you all safe." But as the day progressed, the impossible nature of his situation became increasingly apparent. The town had no rooms to let suitable for children. His savings, while substantial from years of frugal living, wouldn't stretch to buying property immediately. And the stares from townsfolk made it clear a single man raising 3 young children faced nearly insurmountable suspicion and obstacles. As dusk approached, Cole sat on the steps of the church, his head in his hands, the children playing quietly nearby under Widow Peters' watchful eye. He'd never felt so utterly at a loss. "Mr. Marshall." He looked up to find the woman from the general store standing before him, her wagon parked nearby. In the fading light, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with eyes that held both strength and recent sorrow. "Madam," he acknowledged, rising to his feet. "Tessa Finley," she introduced herself. "I have a proposition for you if you'd hear it." Cole listened with increasing disbelief. As Tessa outlined her suggestion, a marriage of convenience that would provide his sister's children with a proper home and maternal care, while giving her purpose and companionship in return. Her homestead had good land, she explained, but she couldn't work it alone, and the town had already begun to write her off as a woman without prospects. "You don't know me," Cole said finally, studying her face for signs of madness or deception. "Why would you tie yourself to a stranger and 3 orphan children?" Tessa's eyes drifted to where Emma was helping little Abigail stack pebbles. Because I have a home with empty rooms and a heart that was made for mothering, Mr. Marshall. And because this town has already decided what I'm worth, which is very little, according to them. What do you mean? Her chin lifted slightly. My husband left yesterday, 5 years of marriage and no children to show for it, in Watsonville. That makes me less than worthless. Understanding dawned on Cole's face. And taking in orphans would give you status as a mother without having to bear children. It would give these children a mother who would love them fiercely, Tessa corrected him, a flash of fire in her eyes. I'm not looking for status, Mr. Marshall. I'm looking for family. Cole ran a hand through his hair, the audacity of her proposal leaving him momentarily speechless. Marriage is a mighty permanent solution to our temporary problems, Mrs. Finley. Is it temporary for them? Tessa gestured toward the children. They've lost both parents. They need stability, a home, 2 people committed to raising them properly. What's your alternative? He had none, and they both knew it. I don't aim to trap you, Tessa added softly. We could draw up terms, a business arrangement with clear expectations. I get to be their mother, you get to keep your family together. The homestead has good prospects with a strong man working it. We both get companionship and respectability. And what about? Cole hesitated, uncomfortable with discussing such matters with a woman he barely knew. A flush colored Tessa's cheeks. If you're asking about marital relations, I propose separate bedrooms, at least to start. If feelings develop naturally over time, we can reconsider. I'm offering partnership, Mr. Marshall, not servitude. Cole found himself admiring her forthright nature despite the unorthodox proposal. He glanced again at the children, at Emma's watchful eyes that had seen too much loss already. I'll need to sleep on this, he said finally. It's not a decision to make lightly. Tessa nodded, apparently having expected as much. The children and you are welcome to stay at my home tonight regardless. It's better than the livery stable, which is likely your only other option in town. That night, after the children had been settled in clean beds for the first time in weeks, Cole sat at Tessa's kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him. The woman herself moved efficiently around the kitchen, her presence already bringing a sense of order to their chaos. Tell me why you really proposed this arrangement, Cole said quietly. The honest truth. Tessa paused, her hands stilling on the dish she was drying. Because when I saw those children today, something inside me recognized them as mine, even though they aren't. Because I've prayed for motherhood every night for 5 years, and maybe God has a different path in mind than the one I expected. She turned to face him fully. And because when I saw you with them, I recognized a good man doing his best against impossible odds. I respect that. Cole studied her, seeing beyond the practical exterior to the deep well of emotion she kept carefully controlled. If we do this, we'd be tied together for years at least until the youngest is grown. I understand that. People will talk. They'll say you were desperate, that I took advantage. A wry smile touched her lips. People are already talking, Mr. Marshall. At least this way the children will be cared for properly while they do. He took a slow breath. If, and I mean if we were to consider this arrangement, I have conditions. I won't be a guest in my sister's children's lives. I'd be their father in every way that matters, making decisions alongside you. I wouldn't want it any other way, Tessa agreed, and the homestead would become as much mine as yours. I won't work another person's land without stake in it. We could visit the lawyer tomorrow, have papers drawn up for joint ownership. Cole leaned back, surprised by her ready agreement. You'd give half your property to a man you just met today. I'm considering giving my life to a man I just met today, Tessa countered quietly. The land seems a minor consideration by comparison. Something shifted in Cole's chest, respect, certainly, but something warmer as well. This woman had courage and clarity of purpose that matched his own. Last condition, he said, we give this a real chance. Not just as caretakers to these children, but as partners to each other. I'm not asking for love right away, that would be foolish, but I won't live my life in a marriage of frozen politeness either. Tessa's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Friendship, then, to start. With openness to whatever might follow naturally. Just so, Cole agreed, extending his hand across the table. Then I believe we have an arrangement, Mrs. Finley. Tessa, she corrected, placing her smaller hand in his. If we're to be married, you should use my given name. Tessa, he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. And I'm Cole. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary pact they'd just made. 2 days later, they stood before the town's pastor in a ceremony attended only by the children, Widow Peters, and the lawyer who had drawn up their property agreements. Tessa wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton garment that brought out the depth of her eyes. Cole had purchased a new shirt, his freshly trimmed hair and clean-shaven face revealing handsome features previously obscured by trail dust and exhaustion. Do you, Cole Marshall, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Pastor Miller asked, his expression showing clear disapproval of the hasty arrangement. Cole's eyes never left Tessa's face. I do. And do you, Tessa Finley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Tessa replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the commitment she was making. The simple gold band Cole placed on her finger had been purchased that morning, a tangible symbol of their unusual union. When the pastor reluctantly pronounced them husband and wife, Cole hesitated only briefly before placing a gentle, chaste kiss on Tessa's lips. It lasted merely a second, but Tessa felt an unexpected warmth spread through her at the contact. This was not how she had imagined beginning a second marriage to a stranger. No less, but as Emma stepped forward to hug her, whispering, "Are you our mother now?" against her skirts, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered, kneeling to embrace the solemn child. "I am your mother now in all the ways that matter." The first weeks of their unusual marriage unfolded in a careful dance of boundaries and adjustments. Cole moved his few possessions into the small bedroom that had once been Thomas's workshop, while Tessa maintained the main bedroom. The children were arranged in the third bedroom, Emma and Abigail sharing the larger bed, while James took the small trundle that Cole built in his first week at the homestead. Every morning, Cole rose before dawn to tend the livestock and work the land. Tessa found herself impressed by his tireless industry and skill. This was no drifter playing at farming. Cole Marshall knew how to work land effectively, how to mend fences, repair roofs, and strengthen the foundations of their home against the coming winter. For her part, Tessa threw herself into motherhood with natural grace and fierce dedication. She sewed new clothes for the children, taught Emma to read better, helped James overcome his nightmares, and spent hours rocking Abigail when the toddler woke crying for her mother in the night. "You're good with them," Cole observed one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, a rare moment of adult conversation in days filled with constant activity. Tessa smiled, genuine pleasure warming her at the compliment. "They make it easy. They're remarkable children." "Sarah would be grateful," Cole said quietly, "knowing they have a mother like you." Their eyes met in the lantern light, a current of understanding passing between them. Though they maintained their separate bedrooms and careful personal boundaries, something was slowly building between them, a partnership deeper than either had anticipated. Their first real test as a family came a month into their marriage, when 7-year-old Emma declared flatly over breakfast that Tessa was not her real mother and she would not obey her. The outburst had come after Tessa asked the girl to help with the breakfast dishes instead of rushing outside to watch Cole work with the new calf he'd purchased. "My real mother never made me do chores in the morning," Emma stated, arms crossed defiantly over her thin chest. A silence fell over the kitchen. James looked down at his plate, while little Abigail, oblivious to the tension, continued smashing her porridge with a spoon. Tessa set down the plate she was holding, pain flashing across her face before she carefully schooled her expression. "Emma, I know I'm not your birth mother, but you'll apologize to your mother right now. Cole's voice cut through the room as he stepped in from the back door, his tone brooking no argument. And then you'll help with the dishes as asked. Emma's lower lip trembled. But she's not she is the woman who has chosen to love you, feed you, clothe you, and care for you every day, Cole said firmly, kneeling to meet his niece at eye level. She is your mother in all the ways that matter now, Emma. Your mama Sarah would be grateful knowing you have Tessa in your life. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. But if I love Tessa, I'm being disloyal to mama. Tessa moved swiftly then, gathering the child into her arms despite the initial resistance. Oh, sweetheart, no. Loving me doesn't mean loving your mama any less. Your heart has room for both of us. As Emma dissolved into tears against Tessa's shoulder, Cole watched with a tightness in his throat. The tender way Tessa held his niece, the wisdom in her words, the patience in her manner all confirmed what he'd begun to suspect over the past weeks. Their marriage of convenience had brought a remarkable woman into their lives, one who was healing broken places Cole hadn't even realized existed. That night after the children were asleep, Cole found Tessa sitting alone by the fireplace, mending one of James's shirts with quick, precise stitches. "Thank you," he said simply, taking the chair opposite her, "for how you handled Emma today." Tessa's fingers paused briefly. She's grieving. Children often express grief through anger. Still, many would have responded with punishment or coldness. She needs love, not discipline when she's hurting. Tessa's eyes met his, warm in the firelight. They all do. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deeper recognition, perhaps, of the person behind the practical arrangement they'd made. "I've been thinking," Cole said carefully. "The barn roof needs repairs before winter sets in properly. I could use help holding the beams tomorrow." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me to help with barn repairs, Cole Marshall?" A half-smile tugged at his mouth. "I am, unless you think it's not proper work for a lady." "I've never much cared what's considered proper," Tessa replied with a small laugh. "I'll help, but you'll have to show me what to do." The next day found them working side by side on the barn roof, the children playing within sight in the yard below. Cole was impressed by Tessa's strength and willingness to tackle the difficult work. She never complained about splinters or the weight of the beams, instead concentrating fully on each task he explained. When a sudden gust of wind caught her off balance, Cole's arm shot out instinctively, catching her around the waist before she could slide down the angled roof. "Steady now," he murmured, his face suddenly very close to hers. Tessa's breath caught at the proximity, at the solid strength of the arm around her waist. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, their eyes locked, something electric and unmistakable passing between them. "Thank you," she whispered, acutely aware of his hand still at her waist. Cole nodded, releasing her slowly, ensuring she had regained her balance. But something had shifted irrevocably in those brief seconds of contact and acknowledgement that the careful boundaries of their arrangement were beginning to blur. As winter descended on Montana territory, the Marshall homestead, as it was now known in Watsonville, grew increasingly cozy and close-knit. The bitter cold drove the family indoors most days, creating a forced intimacy that gradually dissolved the last vestiges of awkwardness between Cole and Tessa. They developed evening rituals, Cole reading to the children before bedtime while Tessa prepared hot chocolate, then the two adults sitting by the fire, talking late into the night after the little ones were asleep. They shared stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their disappointments. Cole spoke of his years driving cattle across the Western Territories. Tessa revealed the heartbreak of her first marriage and the monthly disappointments that had gradually destroyed it. "Did you ever consider that perhaps the problem wasn't with you?" Cole asked one snowy evening after Tessa had explained how Thomas had blamed her exclusively for their childlessness. Tessa looked up from her knitting, surprise evident in her expression. "What do you mean? Men can be barren too," Cole said quietly. I've known ranchers who could never sire calves with their bulls, no matter how many healthy heifers they tried. Why would humans be any different? The simple logic of his statement struck Tessa with the force of revelation. In 5 years, not once had anyone, not the doctor, not the midwife, certainly not Thomas, suggested that the failure might not lie with her. I never considered that, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Cole's expression softened. Thomas was a fool to leave you, regardless. A wife is more than a bearer of children. Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and Tessa felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous and hopeful that she'd sworn not to feel again after Thomas's betrayal. As Christmas approached, Tessa threw herself into creating a proper celebration for the children. She baked cookies, sewed new stockings, and worked secretly on handmade gifts when the children were occupied elsewhere. Cole, meanwhile, disappeared on mysterious errands to town, returning with packages hidden under his coat that he stored in the barn away from prying eyes. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but festive dinner, Cole surprised them all by producing a small pine tree he'd cut from their land, setting it up in a corner of the main room. "Every Christmas needs a tree," he explained as the children squealed with delight. Together, the family decorated it with strings of dried berries, paper ornaments the children had made, and precious candy canes Cole had purchased in town. As Tessa hung the last ornament, a small wooden star Cole had carved his hand covered hers on the branch, the casual touch sending warmth up her arm. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" His eyes, illuminated by the firelight, held hers with unexpected intensity. "For making this a real home. For giving these children and me something we've never properly had before." Later that night, with the children finally asleep in anticipation of morning's gifts, Tessa and Cole sat side by side on the small sofa, admiring the humble tree and the cozy room around them. "I have something for you," Cole said suddenly, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "But we agreed no gifts for each other," Tessa protested. "Just for the children," Cole merely smiled. "Some agreements deserve to be broken. Open it." With curious fingers, Tessa unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate flowers and vines. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a delicate silver locket. "Cole," she breathed, lifting it with reverent fingers. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny portrait, a miniature painting of Emma, James, and Abigail, their small faces captured with remarkable detail. "How did you?" "There's a traveling painter who was passing through Watsonville last week. I brought the children to town while you were visiting Widow Peters." He looked slightly self-conscious. "I thought you might like having them close to your heart, even when they're not with you." Tears pricked Tessa's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Would you help me put it on?" Cole took the delicate chain, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft as he fastened it around her neck. His hands lingered at her nape, a whisper of contact that sent shivers down her spine. When she turned to thank him, his face was closer than she'd expected, his eyes dark with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to name. "I have something for you too," Tessa admitted, rising to retrieve a package hidden in her sewing basket. "It's not as fine as your gift, but—" Cole unwrapped the homemade scarf, his fingers tracing the intricate pattern she'd spent weeks knitting in secret. "This is the finest gift I've received in many years," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because it was made by your hands." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Cole's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and Tessa found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by an invisible force. The sudden cry of Abigail from the children's room broke the moment. With a rueful smile, Tessa stood to attend to the toddler, but as she passed Cole, he caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lingered just long enough to send her heart racing. "Merry Christmas, Tessa," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, Cole," she replied, her voice steadier than the fluttering pulse in her wrist where his lips had touched. As she comforted Abigail back to sleep, Tessa realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, their practical arrangement had transformed into something far more complicated and far more precious than either had anticipated. The new year brought challenges that tested their growing bond. A particularly harsh blizzard trapped them indoors for nearly a week, supplies running dangerously low as they rationed food to ensure the children remained well fed. Cole fell ill with a fever that left Tessa sleepless for 3 nights, applying cool cloths to his forehead and praying with a fervor that surprised even her. "Don't you dare leave us," she whispered fiercely against his burning brow on the second night, when his fever peaked dangerously high. "These children have lost enough. I've lost enough. You fight, Cole Marshall." Whether it was her desperate pleading or his own stubborn constitution, Cole's fever broke the following morning. When he opened his eyes to find Tessa slumped asleep in the chair beside his bed, dark circles beneath her eyes and his hand clutched tightly in hers, something fundamental shifted in his heart. This woman who had begun as a convenient solution to his problem had become essential to his happiness in ways he'd never imagined possible. As winter gradually released its grip on the land, new life began to stir on the Marshall homestead. The vegetable garden Tessa had planned during the cold months took shape under her careful hands. Cole expanded the chicken coop and added 2 milk cows to their small but growing herd. The children thrived. Emma's reading improved dramatically under Tessa's tutelage. James grew 2 inches seemingly overnight, and little Abigail began speaking in complete sentences that delighted everyone. One warm spring afternoon, as Cole repaired a fence in the south pasture, he looked up to see Tessa approaching with a jug of water, her hair gleaming copper in the sunlight. Something about the sight of her, the easy grace of her movements, the gentle smile that now came more frequently caused a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with thirst. "You've been working since dawn," she chided gently, handing him the water. "The fence won't run away if you take a moment's rest." Cole drank deeply, watching her over the rim of the cup. "The property line's important. Baxter's cattle have been straying onto our grazing land." "Our land," Tessa repeated, a note of satisfaction in her voice as she surveyed the rolling hills around them. "It feels more like that every day, doesn't it? Our land, our home." "Our family," Cole added quietly, setting down the cup. Their eyes met, the unspoken feelings between them growing harder to ignore with each passing day. The separate bedrooms they'd maintained through winter suddenly seemed an artificial boundary, one that neither was quite ready to acknowledge aloud. "Cole," Tessa began, then hesitated, color rising in her cheeks. "Yes," he prompted, taking a half-step closer. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever she had been about to say. They turned to see a rider approaching at speed. Peter Miller, the pastor's 17-year-old son, his face tight with urgency. "Mr. Marshall, Mrs. Marshall," he called as he reined his horse to a stop. "You're needed in town right away. Doc Williams sent me. It's about your former husband, Mrs. Marshall Thomas Finley." Tessa's face drained of color. "Thomas, what about him?" "He's been shot. Bad. Happened during a saloon fight in Helena. They brought him to Watsonville because he kept asking for this place." Peter shifted uncomfortably. "Doc says he likely won't last the night." "He's asking to speak with you, madam. Said it was important." Cole's expression hardened, but he placed a gentle hand on Tessa's shoulder. "I'll hitch the wagon. We'll go together." The ride to town passed in tense silence, Tessa's thoughts a chaotic tumble of emotions. What could Thomas possibly want after abandoning her so cruelly? Part of her wanted to refuse this final request, to deny him the peace of whatever absolution he sought. Yet another part, the part that had once loved him despite his cruelty, couldn't ignore a dying man's plea. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to," Cole said finally, breaking the silence as Watsonville came into view. "No one would blame you." Tessa's hands twisted in her lap. "I need to know what he wants to say, for my own peace if nothing else." Cole nodded, though his jaw remained tight. "I'll be right outside if you need me." The doctor's small infirmary smelled of carbolic acid and impending death. Thomas lay on a narrow cot, his once handsome face ashen and drawn with pain, a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his abdomen. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by injury and the months of hard living that had clearly followed his departure. His eyes fluttered open at Tessa's approach, recognition and something like shame crossing his features. "Tessa," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You came." "The doctor says you asked for me," she replied, maintaining a careful distance from the bed. Thomas's laugh turned into a painful cough. "Not sure I deserve that kindness after how I left." "What do you want, Thomas?" Tessa asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. His eyes closed briefly, pain etching deeper lines around his mouth. "To apologize and to tell you something you should know." He paused, gathering strength. "I was wrong to blame you for not having children. Found out after I left that the problem was mine all along." Tessa's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Took up with a widow in Helena. She already had 4 healthy children from her first husband. Thomas's voice grew weaker. 6 months together and she never quickened. Her doctor said some men just can't father children. A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Turns out I was the barren one, not you." The confirmation of what Cole had suggested months ago washed over Tessa like a physical wave. All those years of self-recrimination, of feeling less than a woman, of enduring Thomas's growing resentment, all based on a cruel misconception. "Why tell me this now?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Because I ruined your life over a lie," Thomas whispered. "And a man facing his maker wants to set things right. You deserved better, Tessa, always did." She stood very still, absorbing the enormity of his confession. The anger she'd expected to feel was strangely absent, replaced by a vast, liberating sense of vindication. "You didn't ruin my life, Thomas," she said finally. "You freed me to find a better one." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Heard you remarried, some cowboy with orphans." "Cole Marshall," Tessa confirmed, a warmth entering her voice despite herself. "And yes, we're raising his sister's children together." Something like genuine regret crossed Thomas's face. "Good, that's good. You always wanted children." He paused, another spasm of pain crossing his features. "Does he treat you well?" The simple question brought unexpected tears to Tessa's eyes. "Better than I ever imagined possible." Thomas nodded weakly. "I'm glad. You deserve that." His breathing grew more labored. "I just wanted you to know the truth, so you'd understand it was never your fault." "Thank you for that," Tessa said softly, finding that she meant it. She stayed until Thomas drifted into unconsciousness, the doctor quietly informing her that he likely wouldn't wake again. When she emerged from the infirmary, she found Cole waiting on the porch, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. One look at her face told him everything. Without a word, he opened his arms and Tessa stepped into his embrace, burying her face against his chest as the first tears fell. "He said I wasn't barren," she whispered against Cole's shirt. "It was him all along." Cole's arms tightened around her. "I'm sorry for all the pain he caused you." "No," Tessa pulled back slightly, looking up into his face. "Don't you see? This changes everything. I'm not broken, Cole, I never was." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a tenderness that made her heart skip. Gently, he brushed a tear from her cheek. "You were never broken to me, Tessa. Not for a single moment." The ride home was quieter, but the silence between them now hummed with unspoken possibilities. As they approached their homestead in the golden light of late afternoon, Tessa looked at the modest house with new eyes, not as a place of past failures, but as the beginning of unexpected blessings. Thomas died in the early hours of the following morning. The news reached them via the miller's son, along with word that the funeral would be held the next day. Cole offered to accompany Tessa, but she declined. "My life with Thomas ended months ago," she explained as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. "His passing doesn't change that. My place is here with you and the children." Cole studied her face in the soft lamplight. Are you certain? Sometimes proper goodbyes help with moving forward. Tessa's hand found his on the porch railing, their fingers intertwining naturally. I've already moved forward, Cole. Further than I ever thought possible. His thumb traced gentle patterns on her skin. What Thomas told you yesterday about not being barren, has that changed how you think about the future? The directness of the question made her breath catch, but Tessa found herself answering with equal honesty. It's made me realize I've been holding part of myself back, not just from the possibility of having my own children someday, but from fully embracing what we've built here. Cole shifted to face her more directly. And what is it you think we've built, Tessa? A true marriage, she whispered. Not just the arrangement we agreed to 6 months ago. The silence that followed was charged with anticipation. Cole lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spiraling through her. I've wanted to tell you for months now, he said, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. Our arrangement became something else for me long ago. I find myself thinking of you at odd moments during the day. Wondering what you'd think of something I've seen, or longing to share stories with you in the evening. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. When did it change for you? A smile touched his lips. Maybe that first day on the barn roof, when I caught you and saw real fear in your eyes, not for yourself, but for what would happen to the children if you were hurt. Or perhaps during that blizzard, when you nursed me through the fever with such fierce determination. His hand came up to cup her cheek. But I think, in truth, it began the moment you offered your home and heart to 3 orphaned children and a lost cowboy who had nowhere else to turn. Tessa leaned into his touch. I never expected to feel this way again. After Thomas, I thought that part of me was finished. And now, Cole's question hung between them, fragile and hopeful. Instead of answering with words, Tessa closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with months of suppressed longing. Cole's arms encircled her, drawing her closer until she was practically in his lap, their hearts beating a frantic rhythm against each other. When they finally broke apart, breathless and slightly stunned, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Tessa Marshall. Not for convenience, not for the children, but for the remarkable woman you are. Tears sparkled in Tessa's eyes. And I love you, Cole Marshall, with a heart I thought was beyond repair until you showed me otherwise. That night, Tessa led Cole by the hand to her bedroom, their bedroom now closing the door on the last of the boundaries between them. Summer brought abundant growth to the Marshall homestead. The vegetable garden flourished under Tessa's care, providing fresh produce for their table and extra to sell in town. Cole's careful management of their small herd resulted in healthy calves and the promise of expanded operations the following year. The children blossomed like wildflowers. Emma lost her first tooth and proudly learned to help with simple cooking. James proved to have a natural affinity with animals, and Abigail's vocabulary expanded exponentially each week. But the most significant change was the transformation of Cole and Tessa's relationship. What had begun as a practical arrangement had deepened into a love that surprised them both with its intensity. The separate bedrooms arrangement was long abandoned, replaced by nights of shared warmth and days filled with the small, precious intimacies of a couple deeply in love. By late July, when the prairie grasses turned golden under the relentless sun, Tessa began to suspect what the intermittent morning nausea and tender breasts might mean. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, unwilling to raise hopes Cole's or her own until she was certain. But as August approached and her monthly cycle remained absent for the 3rd time, the evidence became difficult to ignore. Still, a lifetime of disappointment made her cautious. She waited until she was absolutely certain before deciding to share the news. The opportunity came on a warm evening in early August. The children had been put to bed after an exhausting day of helping with the harvest, and Cole and Tessa sat on the porch swing he'd built for her birthday, watching the sunset paint spectacular colors across the Montana sky. "You've been quiet today," Cole observed, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. "Something troubling you?" Tessa took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Not troubling exactly, just important." Cole turned to study her face, concern evident in his expression. "What is it, love?" "Do you remember what Thomas told me before he died, about me not being barren?" Cole's brow furrowed slightly. "Of course, it was a significant revelation for you." "Well," Tessa said softly, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach, "it appears he was right." For a moment, Cole stared at his hand on her abdomen, uncomprehending. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by disbelief and overwhelming joy. "Tessa," he breathed, his voice cracking, "are you saying?" She nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "I'm with child, Cole." "Our child?" With a sound that was half laugh, half sob, Cole gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for weeks, but I wanted to be certain before telling you." She smiled through her tears. "I'm about 3 months along by my calculation." Cole's hand returned to her stomach, reverent and protective. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "The children will have a little brother or sister by winter," Tessa said, covering his hand with her own. "How are you feeling? Do you need to rest more? Should we call the doctor?" The questions tumbled out in rapid succession, making Tessa laugh. "I'm perfectly well, my love. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll continue with my usual tasks until I can't." Cole's expression turned serious. "You'll be careful, though, promise me." The concern in his voice touched her deeply. "I promise. This baby is a miracle I never thought to experience." "I'll take every precaution." They sat in contented silence for several minutes, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. "I've been thinking," Cole said eventually. "The children should know about the baby, of course, but they might have questions about how they fit into our family now." Tessa nodded thoughtfully. "Especially Emma. She might worry that a baby of our own blood would be more important to us." "What if," Cole suggested slowly, "we made their place in our family official, legally, I mean?" "Adoption." Tessa's face brightened at the idea. "Oh, Cole, that's perfect. They already feel like our children in every way that matters." "They are our children," Cole agreed firmly. "This baby won't change that. It will just make our family bigger." Tessa leaned against him, happiness radiating through her like sunlight. From a marriage of convenience to a family of 6 in just over 8 months. Who would have thought it possible? Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. "They called you barren and worthless," he murmured against her skin. "But from the moment I met you, I knew you were the mother my heart had been searching for Emma, James, and Abigail, and now for our baby too." Telling the children about the baby the next morning brought reactions that ranged from Abigail's confused "baby in mama's tummy" to James's practical questions about where the baby would sleep. Emma, as expected, was quietest, watching Tessa with solemn eyes throughout breakfast. Later, as Tessa hung laundry in the yard, Emma approached hesitantly. "Mama," the title still filled Tessa's heart with joy every time she heard it. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart, anything." Emma twisted her hands in her apron. "When the new baby comes, will you love it more than us? Because it's really yours." Tessa immediately set down the wet sheet she'd been hanging and knelt before the girl, taking her small hands. "Emma Marshall, listen to me very carefully. You, James, and Abigail became my children the moment I married your Uncle Cole. Not by blood, but by choice, which is an even stronger bond." "Really?" Emma's voice was small. "Absolutely. And do you know what your father and I were discussing just last night, making you 3 legally our children through adoption? Would you like that?" Emma's eyes widened. "You'd be our real mother and father, on paper and everything." "We already are in all the ways that matter," Tessa assured her. "But yes, it would be official for everyone to see." A smile broke across Emma's face like sunshine after rain. "I'd like that very much." "Then it's settled." Tessa said, pulling her into a hug. "And when this baby arrives, you'll be its big sister, a very important job that only you can do." As summer faded into fall, life on the Marshall homestead continued its steady rhythm, though accommodations were gradually made for Tessa's growing condition. Cole insisted on hiring a local boy to help with the heavier farm work, freeing Tessa from some of her more strenuous chores. The adoption proceedings moved forward, bringing a new sense of permanence to their family bonds. By October, Tessa's pregnancy was obvious to everyone, her rounded belly a source of fascination for the children, who would often place their hands on it to feel the baby kick. In town, the same people who had once whispered about Tessa's barrenness now smiled approvingly at the visible evidence of the Marshalls' happiness. "Quite a change from last year," Walter Green remarked one day when Cole came to the general store for supplies. "You've built something special out there, Marshall." Cole couldn't help but agree. The homestead was thriving under their joint care, the children were flourishing, and his love for Tessa deepened with each passing day. The baby expected in early January was the culmination of blessings he'd never dared hope for after Sarah's death. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow in mid-November that blanketed the countryside in pristine white. The Marshall home stood warm against the cold, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with lamplight in the early darkness. Inside, preparations for both Christmas and the baby's arrival occupied much of their time. Cole converted part of their bedroom into a nursery area, building a cradle from seasoned pine that he polished until it gleamed. Tessa and Emma sewed tiny garments in the evenings, while James proudly announced his intention to teach the baby to ride as soon as it was big enough. As Christmas approached, Tessa's pregnancy advanced to its final stages. The baby was active, sometimes keeping her awake at night with its energetic movements. Cole would often place his hand on her belly in those quiet, dark hours, marveling at the miracle growing beneath his palm. "What shall we name this little one?" he asked one such night, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. Tessa considered, her fingers intertwined with his atop her rounded abdomen. "If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Samuel, after your father." Cole was silent for a moment, touched by her thoughtfulness. "And if it's a girl, Sarah," Tessa said softly, "for your sister who brought us together." Cole's arms tightened around her, his face pressing into her hair to hide the sudden moisture in his eyes. "Perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Christmas that year was a joyous affair despite, or perhaps, because of its simplicity. The children received practical gifts like new boots and warm scarves, along with special treasures. A doll for Abigail, a pocket knife for James, and a set of watercolors for Emma, who had shown artistic talent. Cole surprised Tessa with a rocking chair positioned near the fireplace, perfect for nursing the coming baby. Tessa's gift to Cole moved him deeply, a family portrait she had commissioned in secret, showing him, Tessa, and the three children grouped together, with space clearly left for the addition of the baby's image later. "Our family," he said, voice rough with emotion as he studied the likeness. "Complete, even as it grows," Tessa agreed, leaning against his shoulder. The new year arrived with a ferocious blizzard that isolated the homestead for 3 days. On the morning of January 3, 1877, as the storm finally began to abate, Tessa woke Cole with a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," she said simply, her face calm despite the pain evident in her eyes. Cole was instantly alert, years of handling emergencies on cattle drives serving him well now. He woke Emma, giving her responsibility for watching her younger siblings, then helped Tessa back to bed before saddling his strongest horse. "I'll be back with the doctor as quickly as possible," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Can you manage until then?" Tessa nodded, a small smile curving her lips despite the contraction currently gripping her. "Babies come in their own time, Cole. We'll be fine. Just be safe on the roads." The journey to Watsonville was treacherous, ice-covered trails slowing his progress despite his urgency. When Cole finally reached Dr. Williams's home, the physician was thankfully available, though concerned about the conditions. "The baby's coming regardless of the weather," Cole said grimly, "and I won't let my wife face this alone." The return journey seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was barely mid-afternoon when they arrived back at the homestead. Cole's heart nearly stopped when he heard Tessa's cry of pain as they entered the house. "Doctor." Williams took charge immediately, ushering Cole out after a brief assessment. "First babies often take their time," he said reassuringly, "but Mrs. Marshall is strong and healthy. Try not to worry." The waiting was an exquisite form of torture. Cole distracted himself and the children by preparing dinner, telling stories, and repeatedly checking that enough water was heating on the stove. As darkness fell and Tessa's labor intensified, he sent the children to bed, though he doubted Emma would sleep with her mother's occasional cries echoing through the house. Shortly after midnight, a new sound pierced the quiet home, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Cole, who had been pacing the main room like a caged animal, froze in place, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door to the bedroom opened several minutes later, Dr. Williams emerging with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Marshall, you have a healthy son." Cole felt his knees weaken with relief and joy. "And Tessa, tired but well, she did beautifully." The doctor clapped him on the shoulder. "You can go in now." Nothing could have prepared Cole for the sight that greeted him. Tessa, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Her hair was damp with sweat, her face flushed from exertion, but to Cole, she had never looked more beautiful. "Come meet your son," she said softly as he approached the bed. With trembling hands, Cole took the swaddled infant, marveling at how small and perfect he was. A shock of dark hair, still damp from birth, covered his head. As Cole watched, the baby's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing glimpses of deep blue. "Samuel," Cole whispered, testing the name they'd chosen. "Samuel Marshall." "He has your chin," Tessa observed, her voice tender with exhaustion and love. "And I think he'll have your height too from the look of his long fingers." Cole carefully returned the baby to Tessa's arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For Samuel, for loving Emma and James and Abigail, for making this house a home. For everything, Tessa." She leaned into him, their son nestled between them. "We've come a long way from that desperate proposal in front of the church, haven't we?" Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. "The best decision I ever made." A soft knock at the door announced Emma, her face anxious until she saw Tessa's smile. "Would you like to meet your brother?" Tessa asked, beckoning her forward. Emma approached cautiously, followed by James, who had also woken. Even little Abigail toddled in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "This is Samuel," Cole said, lifting Abigail so she could see the baby's face. "Your brother." "He's so small," James observed with the critical eye of a 5-year-old. "He'll grow," Tessa assured him. "Just like all of you have." Emma reached out a hesitant finger to touch the baby's hand. To everyone's delight, Samuel's tiny fingers closed reflexively around his sister's. "He's holding my hand," Emma exclaimed, wonder filling her voice. "He knows his family," Cole said, his arm tightening around Tessa as he surveyed the scene before him, 4 children who called him father, a woman who had transformed his life with her love, and a home filled with the warmth of belonging. Spring found the Marshall homestead flourishing. The adoption papers had finally been approved, making Emma, James, and Abigail legally Cole and Tessa's children. Samuel, now 4 months old, was a healthy, cheerful baby who had his father wrapped firmly around his tiny finger. On a warm April afternoon, as wildflowers dotted the prairie with splashes of color, Tessa sat on the porch with Samuel nursing contentedly at her breast. From her vantage point, she could see Cole in the north pasture, teaching Emma to ride the gentle mare he'd purchased specifically for her. James was nearby, solemnly helping to mend a fence, while Abigail played with blocks on a blanket spread beside Tessa. The picture they made her family, thriving in the golden sunlight, filled Tessa's heart to overflowing. Just 2 years earlier, she had stood on this same porch, devastated by Thomas's cruel departure and the label of Barren that had seemed to define her worth. Now she was mother to 4 children, wife to a man whose love sustained her daily, and mistress of a home filled with joy. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Cole was returning from the pasture, Emmer riding proudly beside him on her own mount. The sight of his broad smile as he helped his daughter dismount made Tessa's heart swell with love all over again. "Did you see me, Mama?" Emma called excitedly as she ran toward the porch. "I can ride all by myself now." "I saw, sweetheart," Tessa confirmed. "You looked very capable up there." Cole followed at a more measured pace, stopping to swing Abigail up into his arms before joining Tessa on the porch. His free hand rested gently on Samuel's downy head as the baby continued nursing. "You were right," he said quietly, so only Tessa could hear. "About what?" His eyes, warm with love, met hers. "That day you proposed our arrangement. You said you had a home with empty rooms and a heart made for mothering." He glanced at the children, Emma now showing James a flower she'd picked, Abigail babbling happily in his arms, Samuel drowsily content at Tessa's breast. "I've never seen a more natural mother than you, Tessa Marshall." Tessa leaned against his solid presence, gratitude filling her. "And I've never known a better father than you." "Not bad for a marriage that started as a business arrangement," Cole said with a soft laugh. "The best kind of business," Tessa replied, smiling up at him. "The kind that profits the heart." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the Marshall family gathered around their table for the evening meal. Hands joined in prayer, voices raised in laughter. Plans made for the days ahead. This was the legacy that Cole and Tessa were building, one day at a time. Outside, the wild Montana landscape stretched in every direction, beautiful and challenging, much like life itself. But within the walls of their home, they had created something rare and precious. A family bound not just by blood or legal documents, but by the enduring power of choice, commitment, and love. For Tessa, once called barren and worthless, and for Cole, the cowboy who had seen her true value from the start, it was more than enough. It was everything.